Did work.
Good evening, all. The meeting is started. Welcome, everybody, to the October 24th Long Range Planning Committee meeting. This is a hybrid meeting on RiverHouse, and it is our second LRPC for this site. We're holding this hybrid public meeting, which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted July 7, 2022. Do we have any members of the LRPC that are participating virtually? We have a number of people in the room here, but I think we have some people that are online. If so, raise your hand. I will then get to you later, but I just want to identify. At this time, I'd like to orient us to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting is going to be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, the county's events calendar, and the email notification sent to the LRPC email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. I don't think we have any planning commissioners joining virtually. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feeds, and I will address when it's appropriate to turn them on in a little bit. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active to serve two purposes: for participants who need technical assistance and for other attendees to pose brief clarifying questions to the larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or for any inappropriate statement. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. I would also like to remind everybody who's in the room here, speak up slowly and clearly because our microphones are above us, and we have a lot of people online, so we want everybody to hear what you're saying. And additionally, if you would like to share your screen, please request permission from the LRPC chair prior to doing so for people who are participating virtually. For members of the public who'd like to provide feedback and comments, unlike our regular planning commission meetings, these meetings, the LRPC agenda items are not public hearings. They're for public comments at the chair's discretion. That's me, and I'm exercising that discretion, so we will be having comments at the end. And that will be after the committee discussions have concluded. You'll then be called on at the end of the meeting to speak on each of tonight's agenda items. The speaking time allotted will depend on how many speakers we have. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting, and I'll ask staff to let me know if we have virtual attendees who'd like to provide comment. Staff will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. That's where if you're virtual, that's where you list yourself if you want to do comments. It's in the chat. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by our in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon located on the Teams meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. As an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC's webpage. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. So let's then move on to our meeting. First thing we'll do is, first of all, I'm Jim Langelli, and I'm chairing this meeting tonight. We'll then go around the room and introduce ourselves here, and then people who are virtual, who are committee members, can then also introduce themselves. So why don't we start with you?
I'm Bonnie Ryan. I'm a 27-year resident of RiverHouse. I'm living in the Potomac, and looking forward to what these planning impacts will be on the rest of us who have been living here for so long.
Okay.
I'm also a resident, and I love living in RiverHouse in Potomac. It's the best building there is.
I'm Faison Crush. I'm with JVG Smith right now.
Matt Ginnivan with JVG Smith. Chris Hornash with Nelson Nygaard Transportation Planning, part of the JVG Smith team. Kendra Whitmore, I'm a land use and zoning attorney with Venable.
Daniel Weir, Planning Commission.
Eric Berkey, Planning Commission.
Gottman Schick, president of the RiverHouse Condominium Association, which is right over there.
Richard Grab, representing the representative condominium, which is next to that.
Leo Sarli with the Planning Commission.
Jeffrey Williams, Crystal Pentagon City's Council, and 30-year RiverHouse resident.
Pam Van Hyde, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, a 38-year resident of Rural Highlands.
Nick Giacobbe, representing Aurora Highlands Civic Association. Been in the neighborhood since 1987, started out at the RiverHouse, and I'm representing.
Kateri Garcia, president of Arlington Ridge Civic Association. I'm not going to talk about my age.
It's tough act to follow. I'm Steve Sockwell, Forestry and Natural Resources Committee.
Jane Kim, DES Transportation.
Around the back of the room?
Adam Watson.
Oh, I'm
Sorry.
yeah.
Sorry. Adam Watson, CPHD planning, sorry.
Matt Matsuzak, also CPHD Planning Division.
Tarsi Dunlap, a 13-year renter in Pentagon City and vice president of the Crystal City Civic Association.
Doris?
Doris Ray is still on the advisory commission, and Mr. Chair, I was told there would be an assistant listening.
Do we have that?
We can go.
Okay, we're going to go get it, Doris. Actually, both of you are RiverHouse residents, right? So actually only one person should be at the table for
That's
that?
fine. I was just here in case she needed assistance because she's
I'm
deaf.
Oh,
So she's assistant.
okay, because Doris should also be at the table because she's a member of the Disability Advisory Committee.
Well, then, we'll move over.
Doris, you can move and sit up at the table here.
I can move your chair, Doris. I'm fine.
And meanwhile, we can start further going around, introducing.
You guys want to start next?
Oh.
The outer perimeter?
Sure. I'm Matt Kowalik. I'm a 4-year resident of RiverHouse, just an interested citizen.
Okay.
Alyssa Toth, architect and urban designer. I'm on the Arts Commission and here tonight as a representative of the Public Art Committee.
Murphy Antoine with Torty Gallison Partners, planners and architects, part of the JBGC.
I'm Sharon Bradley with Bradley Site Design and Landscape Architects.
Okay, great. That's in the room here.
We also have another condo association.
Condo Association?
I'm here representing Pentagon Ridge Condo Association, but I've been renting a unit at RiverHouse for 23 years, but I'm here as my Pentagon Ridge condo owner.
Okay, great. Let's get the virtual attendees now who are on the committee. I think we have a Transportation Commission rep.
Adam Theo's going to be sitting in for Chris Lapp.
Introduce yourself.
Yes, this is Adam Theo, alternate representative from the Transportation Commission, sitting in for Chris Slatt. Virtual right now, but I'll be in person in about 10 minutes.
Great, yeah, see you soon. Is there anybody else who's supposed to be at the table who is attending virtually, either representing a civic association or a commission? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, fine, very good. We can then move on then. Tonight's meeting will primarily be transportation oriented. We'll see what we can do on, how much we can do on that. But first, I think the applicant will do their presentation. So I'm turning it over to you now. You have the floor and.
Good evening. My name is Faizan Qureshi. I'm with JBG Smith. On behalf of the applicant team, we're really pleased to be here tonight. So over the course of the next 20 or so minutes, we will be primarily talking about the transportation elements of our site plan applications for the RiverHouse neighborhoods. In addition to that, we'll be giving a quick recap of some of the studies that we previewed in LRPC 1, which were a result of some of our post-submission discussions with the community. In addition, we're really excited to preview some additional studies that react to what we heard in LRPC 1 and other discussions as well. So with that, I'll kick it off to Chris Fornash with Nelson Nygaard to talk about our technical transportation analysis.
Great, thanks, Faizan. So again, nice to see some familiar faces and so many new faces. Chris Warnash with Nelson Megard. So the Pentagon City Sector Plan, redeveloped or revised last year, offers two main areas of guidance for transportation. One is really focused on internal to the site, biking and walking connections, the green ribbon path through the site. And we'll hear a lot more about that after I finish talking and hand it off to the design team. The second set of guidance really is about the edge and primarily the Joyce Street edge and the desire to make improvements to both sections of Joyce that I'll get into more detail on as I walk through material here. I do want to note for folks who are used to, when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about transportation impacts and we're talking about the MMTA, the document that describes those impacts and how to mitigate them. The sector plan delineates that that is for the SBIC process. That said, we conducted an MMTA for this entire site because it is a large site. We needed to consider the impacts holistically, and you'll see some implications of that in just a moment. Next slide. So this slide probably looks familiar to many of you because it is partly based on county data developed in the 22202 study process a few years ago. On my screen, or on the screen here in the room, it looks a little small. So I'll say the left-hand 2/3 basically represents data up through 2015 for some key intersections and locations around RiverHouse, including Joyce Street, Army Navy Drive, and 15th Street. And what it generally shows is that we saw a steady rise in vehicle traffic at this location until about 2005, and then a substantial downward trend starting in the late 2000s as the economy sort of peaked, and we all know the recession that happened in 2008, 2009. But there was an established decreasing trend, significant decreasing trend, all the way up to the beginning of COVID. We did counts originally for this project, meaning we actually had people go out and count the number of vehicles on the street and entering and exiting each RiverHouse driveway, and also the number of people on foot and on bike, not just vehicles, but we are focusing on the vehicles here. We did those in 2019, and those continued to show the significant trend that the county had documented through 2015. Thought it was important, and the county thought it was important to look at more recent counts to support this analysis. So last month, almost exactly a month to the day, so post Labor Day in 2023, post Amazon's return to office, post COVID, if that is a thing that exists, we were out in the field last month doing counts, and they show a continued decrease, in fact, from 2019. Next slide, please. Some specifics for those of you who like the more detailed numbers. The top box shows 2019 and 2023 counts. That's accumulated around all of the essentially driveway locations at current RiverHouse, and it shows in aggregate about a 28% in decrease in vehicle trips in the morning peak and about a 17% decrease in the PM peak hour, not the peak hour in this case. And then the lower box shows for two specific locations, the intersection of Joyce and Army Navy, and Joyce basically at the Planet Fitness across from RiverHouse. Even more significant drops, both in the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour, ranging from about 20% to more than 40% lower. And that's from 2019 to 2023 alone. Why is that important? That's important because, as I mentioned, the sector plan guidance calls for looking at the reallocation of street space along what we're calling here Big Joyce Street, the segment of Joyce from Army Navy down to 15th Street. The sector plan called for an improved sidewalk. It called for, importantly, a protected cycle track, a two-way cycle track. And we've largely achieved that in this proposed design through the reallocation of existing right-of-way. Not entirely. There is additional right-of-way that's required on the RiverHouse side, but by reallocating street space, by limiting the number of vehicle travel lanes from 4 to 2, along with a center turn lane where needed, we've managed to accommodate the cycle track and the other improvements that you see in the graphics there, reducing the crossing distance for people trying to cross Joyce Street there from in front of RiverHouse from 52 feet to 32 feet. That's a significantly safer condition. It's also safer because rather than having to cross 2 lanes in each direction of moving traffic, where we all know the situation where maybe one car yields and the other doesn't see why, dangerous conditions and speeding conditions, frankly. So the results of our analysis, which used the counts that I described before, and also incorporated all the proposed future sector plan growth in Pentagon City and the proposed future RiverHouse growth, showed that, in fact, this traffic condition can be accommodated with reductions in vehicle speeds and associated with that small increases in vehicle travel time, but it's only a few block stretch. So we're really talking about a matter of a number of seconds. So the sector plan, as I noted, also called for changes to Little Joyce, as we call it, south of the intersection with 15th Street. That is currently cuts off two sections of park to the east and to the west, Grace Hopper Park that you're familiar with, and the bulk of Virginia Highlands. The sector plan called for the realignment of that segment of Little Joyce, and we've accommodated that. It now would intersect under this proposal with basically 14th Street, so at the Walgreens, if you're familiar with that. It reads like a driveway, but it would be aligned with 14th Street. And importantly, it enlarges the amount of space available for Virginia Highlands Park. So what we have is a proposed design in our site plan application, but our project, RiverHouse redevelopment, can proceed with that design. It can proceed with a different design. It could proceed without the relocation of that section of Little Joyce. It could be accommodated with existing driveways and connections. So that's essentially how Joyce Street is proposed to change in response to, here you see the specific cross-section proposed in the proposed for Little Joyce Street south of 15. So that's all focusing on, as I mentioned, the Joyce Street edge. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sharon Bradley from the design team to describe all of the pedestrian, bike, and other connections through the site. Sharon.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great segue into other aspects of circulation. Before we get into new material, though, I want to do a quick recap. Last time we talked about 4 major design changes. We talked about the southern edge and maintaining that 40-foot southern setback, preserving trees and adding tree canopy to that. We talked about shifting the green ribbon in Land Bay S to more align with Kent Street. We talked about a C3 chamfer and view sheds there, and the removal of the F2 building in the far northeast. But there were additional questions, and you asked us to study a few things further. So we wanted to dive a little deeper into those aspects today. So today we'll talk about the 15th Street spur and some of the studies we've done since then, the Lynn Street connection, which you had some questions about, and the Land Bay and open space, which we talked a lot about. So we'll go over that more today. So we'll start with the 15th Street spur. So our 4.1 submission, that connection offered the gentlest, most accessible route up the site, up the slope. But where it fell short was its provision for view sheds, east-west. And you asked us to explore that further to see if we can provide those. So at the last LRPC, we presented a new option that did provide that direct line of sight, but the result was a tighter path that resulted in some switchbacks, which was a less graceful way to navigate that slope. So we've studied that still further, and we've arrived at an option that we're pretty excited about because it offers the best of both worlds. With the realignment of the green ribbon and the chamfer of the C3 building, we're providing, as you can see with that red arrow, a very clear line of sight east-west. And we're still able to maintain that graceful, gentle pathway up the slope to the 15th Street spur that respects existing topography and existing vegetation on the slope. So moving to Lynn Street, the Lynn Street connection. We wanted to go into a little bit more detail on how we're making that connection to Lynn Street from RiverHouse. So as you can see in the section on the bottom, the existing stairs are not to code. The risers and treads, they vary in size. They're generally small. The landings are smaller than code. And they're really long runs. That top run is 20 steps long. So that's really not optimal. And there is no ADA compliant access right now to Lynn Street. And it doesn't connect to the bus stop. So we wanted to provide those connections. So we're proposing an ADA compliant route shown on the left with the orange dotted lines, and a set of steps that are much easier to navigate. There's a standard riser tread ratio, shorter and regular stair runs, and ample landings. It creates a connection that's currently absent. We're linking the pedestrian circulation network to the mass transit network. Moving on to Land Bay N. Got a lot of discussions about Land Bay N and that open space. And as inviting and as engaging as we could make those spaces, we know you wanted more. So the team's been working hard on that. There's been a lot of pushing and pulling of that building massing and programming. And the Tortigalis team has arrived at a solution that gains 30 additional feet of open space there. So if we toggle back and forth there a little bit, you can see how dramatic that difference is. The result of this, you see in plan view, it's not only a change in visual character, but it's also it's allowing for a 50% increase in the number of people that you can accommodate in the space. And you can see that the chamfer of the northernmost building aligns more evenly with the Pentagon Row buildings to the east. We're going from 67 to 97 now in that space. So we're going to transition to transportation site-wide. What we've been talking about sets the stage for the discussion around all the transportation elements. And so we'll talk more now about overall connectivity across the site. So going back out to the site-wide view, you can see how we're accommodating the sector plan requirements for both the bike and the green ribbon networks. The plan shows how these networks lay out on the site both individually and in relationship to each other. It also shows how the transportation network is intertwined with the fabric of the open space, and specifically the green ribbon network as an open space. We've developed the green ribbon corridors in agreement with the sector plan. And we've extracted some of the key elements from the sector plan document. And as you can see, we're focused on a green ribbon that is continuous, easy to navigate, and visible. And you're going to see these repeated as we talk about how we're designing the green ribbon. We also are going to talk a little bit more about the sector plan mention that it can occur along public rights of way. And so that is particularly relevant tonight because we're talking about the alignment along Kent. And we know there are a lot of questions around that. So our green ribbon typologies have been developed along the lines using as guidance as the sector plan standard section that you can see in the upper right. So there are a lot of typologies here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they all meet and usually exceed the sector plan requirements. But I want to focus in right now on the Kent Street one that you can see in section B. The staff asked us to realign the green ribbon so it follows Kent Street. And by doing that, by exploring that further, it gave us the opportunity to provide a much larger planting zone there between the pathway and Kent Street and a more biophilic experience than you would get on a typical sidewalk. Okay. The land base is both an open space and it's a key section of the green ribbon. The 12-foot bikeway winds through the space and it has a separate pedestrian pathway that weaves around it. It has many of the same conditions as Penn Place, so we modeled some of our design thoughts on what's happening at Penn Place. We have the width to create a safe and inviting space for both pedestrians and cyclists. The open space here is 65 feet at its narrowest, and it opens out at the east and west, as you can see here in this plan view, to provide nodes that can be very vibrant public open spaces. And finally, these sections illustrate those dimensions and activities. On the left are the separated pedestrian and cyclist zones in the 65-foot width, and on the right you can see how open and celebratory those wider spaces can be. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Murphy to talk about other elements of transportation.
I could swap with you, sure. That's great. Again, for the record, I'm Murphy Antoine with Tortigalis and Partners. And I'll take the opportunity to zoom out a little bit back to the site-wide context of the circulation patterns. And this is a slide that talks about those, the building access in the context of those circulation patterns, the streets, the green ribbons, the bike network that Sharon discussed. You can see in yellow the access, the lobbies to both the new proposed buildings as part of the 4.1 submission and the existing lobbies in the hinges of those triangles of the James, the Potomac, and the Ashley. And what you can see in those yellow squares is that those lobbies, that building access really celebrates and opens up to the public face of those buildings. So along Joyce in the North Land Bay, along Little Joyce to the south in the Central Bay, and then all of those yellow lines to the left and in the upper left of the diagram are the access to the townhomes. So those are really foyers to the private, to the townhomes that happen again along that public edge of those buildings. The parking is another part of this puzzle. So we're talking about structured parking, existing structured parking beneath the Potomac and the Ashley that you see to the left, and new underground structured parking below the Land Bay North and the central footprints of those multifamily buildings. The townhome parking strategy are in the courts in the middle of those blocks. So again, outside of the public face, and then in the upper left on the southwestern edge, some integral parking into those townhomes. In the yellow bands, you also see the, flip back one quickly, the yellow bands, you see the on-street parking in the new streets along Kent Street Extended, the townhome Loop Road and Little Joyce. Those garages are all, the access for those garages is shown on these diagrams with the red arrows into the existing parking at the Potomac and then into those garages between the multifamily, into the multifamily buildings in the Central Land Bay and the Northern Land Bay. On the last slide here, you'll see the parallel in the red arrows, the loading access. So we saw garage access in yellow arrows. Parallel to that in most cases in the newly proposed buildings are the loading access, separate but parallel to those garage accesses. And then in the existing James, Potomac, and Ashley Towers, you can see that loading access that's generally behind those buildings in the back of the hinge. So that's really the circulation and parking and garage access will end again on this three-dimensional view of the whole site with the proposed development and turn it over to the county.
Thank you. Matt, your turn.
All right. Let's share the screen. Okay. All right. Again, I'm Matt Matuzek with the Arlington County Planning Division. Some of the slides that I wanted to cover tonight involve some repeat information from the last meeting in September. I think just looking at the online attendance, we have some folks that were not here last month. So there's some helpful process and overall planning history that I think is worth covering before we get into the issues and the review and next steps. So with that, what I wanted to cover is a couple of minor changes from the process slide that we looked at last month. The more I think we peel back this very dense project, the more I think we learn about the structure of conversations that need to happen. But it's also really informed by the feedback that we received. So there was a lot of comments and feedback that we continue to receive that informs the sequencing of meetings, the sequencing of topics, and it's really helpful in kind of organizing this very large application. For purposes of tonight and mirroring what you just heard from the applicant, we did want to focus on transportation. There is some overlap with public access ways and the Green Ribbon Network that we've heard about and discussed last month, but clearly a different set of challenges and I think elements to review as we focus on accessibility, the street alignment, where parking might be, and really the multimodal character of this property. So with that, I just wanted to highlight that this is a long process. We are beginning with the long-range planning committee that allows us to look at site-wide elements. And I think if we have a productive conversation and feel like we are in a good place in terms of generally where the parks are located, where the buildings are located, and where the streets are located, that allows us to then proceed into the site plan review committee, where more detail can be focused on the specific buildings, the specific green ribbon segments, and a lot of the slides that you already looked at, just in more detail and depth. As we do that and consider that transition from the long-range planning to the site plan review committee, we are going to be focusing on the two parks, one along Army Navy and one across from Pentagon Road or West Coast, where a separate and parallel process, the park master planning process, will also be initiated. This is really a combination of online surveys and some additional dialogues that really drill down with additional stakeholders, in addition to this group, about what we want to see and what the options are in terms of what could happen in those spaces. And also taking into account what's around the block so that we are not really duplicating efforts and really making sure we address key amenities that we want to see here as the site develops. And then finally, at the bottom of the screen, you can see we have public hearings. This is really kind of what we call the roadshow of commissions and committee hearings that all site plans have to go through on their way to the county board hearing, which at this point will be somewhere in the middle of 2024. But again, it's informed by a lot of the discussions that are still ahead of us. We did have a visual that I think tried to capture all of this in one graphic, but I think we're getting to a point where we need to just break that up into two. So for purposes of simplicity, this one really tries to get at the rest of the calendar year. What are we anticipating through the end of December? You can see here in yellow, we're highlighting the topics for tonight's discussion, but soon thereafter, in mid-November, we are identifying an additional and what we consider a final long-range planning committee meeting, at which point all of us could really regroup and consider the feedback we received, all the different studies and where they are concluding possibly from LRPC #1 and tonight's meeting, and really begin to start the transition to the site plan review committee. So I think there's so much to cover, and I think we've heard a lot, and I think to the applicant's credit, they are studying a lot of these issues that we really want to have a firm understanding of the direction we're going into before we make that transition. We are also targeting a walking tour of the property. Ideally, if this weather holds up, November would be a good month to schedule that. And as I mentioned, the park master planning effort could begin as early as December with our colleagues in the Department of Parks and Recreation. So that's the end of this year. Looking at 2024, and again, we're intentionally not identifying any dates because this is still in flux. But in terms of the organization of meetings and topics, this gives you a sense of kind of what we're anticipating, primarily driven by some of the bigger items like transportation, like public space, less so I think about architecture. But again, we're reviewing what essentially looks like 2 or 3 different site plans in one, because site size, the number of buildings. So a lot of these items really have to be broken up and separated for us to have a productive conversation. Next, I wanted to highlight just the adopted policy for the area, particularly the sector plan, and as it relates to this particular property. Those of you that are maybe less familiar, the sector plan was adopted in February 2022 and really sets the stage for how the county board can consider redevelopment applications that still meet the vision that we've set for the property and adjacent parcels to the east. So this establishes more of a regulatory framework and conditions under which additional density could be considered. So we'll get to that as we progress in the slide deck. But one of the key elements that we're going to keep returning to is really a set of planning principles that are embedded in the sector plan that kind of represent the livability priorities that were established back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And they really set the parameters for how we should consider trade-offs, ultimate goals and objectives for the property, particularly in areas where there might not be a clear answer. So I think throughout the process, you're going to see us come back to these 6 planning principles and kind of use them as a guiding light to figure out which direction we should take and how do we arrive at some of these recommendations moving forward. The plan itself does have a development framework, which is comprised of 4 key elements. We've looked at 3 of them in the last month. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on transportation, but some elements of the other items will creep in as well. This gives you a sense of that document and how it informs both the long-range planning and the site plan review committee meetings, given that that's where key recommendations are embedded in terms of what growth could look like on this property. As you look through what is a pretty dense document, the sector plan does have a combination of illustrative exhibits that are intended to kind of spark inspiration and give people a sense of what could happen, different ways in which the plan can be interpreted. But also, as you see on the right, more explicit exhibits that are intended to be regulatory and specifically guide the vision for each particular property. So as you've seen in the last month's meeting, the exhibits that we try to focus on the right are the ones that are utilized in staff's review. Next, we wanted to give you a quick glimpse of what the sector plan speaks to with respect to transportation for the RiverHouse property. This exhibit on the right is really a overarching summary of all public access ways and connections that are anticipated throughout Pentagon City, but particularly on the RiverHouse site. You can see here that in addition to the major arterials surrounding the property, there really is a strategic emphasis on how do we improve north-south and east-west connectivity, and doing it in a way that helps us achieve a multimodal success story here that allows people to not have to rely on cars, even though cars will have a path to navigate through and around this property, but making sure that whether you're using a bike, you're walking, or using micromobility, there's a convenient way to come across, reach your other destination, and do it in a safe and convenient way. And one of the things I think we continue to highlight is really how these public access ways become intuitive, either through safe lighting, signage, and really I think just having a straightforward approach to the alignment that connects some of the key destination points in and around RiverHouse. One of those pathways is, of course, the bike network. We're going to spend a lot of time at the site plan review committee on this, but really for purposes of tonight, trying to see to what degree do we want to emphasize the alignment of this network, where could we identify beneficial redundancy alignment in addition to the primary routes that are indicated on our map, Kent Street, the realigned Joy Street, and some of the other opportunities, and where do we think that network can share space with vehicles and where does it need to be separated in addition to the pedestrian pathways that exist. And finally, the street cross sections, the sector plan gets into great depth where primary arterials are identified. What does that overall cross section look like? Here, obviously, a lot of emphasis on Joy Street, kind of the combination and relationship between bike network, pedestrian, and vehicular traffic, and also looking at sidewalks. Again, going back to the multimodal success story, where should sidewalks be? How wide should they be? To make sure that people feel safe and have multiple opportunities to navigate through the area. And then finally, our last series of slides looks at where initially I think some more information could be beneficial and where staff is developing some initial questions as we review this application. So this is going to start from the south, working our way to the north. On the southern land bay, I think there's a number of sidewalks that I think are not reaching some of the anticipated widths that we've had. This is a tricky conversation because there are some additional and redundant connectivity opportunities here that were not anticipated or expressed in the sector plan. And I think that opens up the conversation to what is the appropriate width. In addition to the sector plan, which does include an 8-foot minimum for clear sidewalks, staff is also referencing the master transportation plan pedestrian element, if I'm not mistaken, which does have, I believe, a 5-foot wide clear sidewalk. So where we fall within that and where we think necessary adjustments are needed is really what we want to hear from you all, particularly where you see the number 1, where I think on the western side of that roadway, we don't have any sidewalks right now. So that's something we just want to clarify and have a conversation around. Additionally, on the bike network, shifting further north a little bit, in the central land bay, I think we're just looking for more information to see how the bike network will be accommodated along Kent Street and the realigned Joy Street. The applicant has some opportunities and options ahead of them, so we're going to be closely monitoring how that gets resolved in relationship to the cross sections we want to achieve there. And I think probably most importantly for tonight's purposes is number 2, where the primary green ribbon pathway intersects with the bike network. And what is that relationship like? And any adjustments we feel are necessary based on what the applicant has proposed. And lastly, this is on the northern side, more for really awareness, and that the applicant is continually working with the fire marshal and our staff in the Department of Environmental Services, and really evaluating the opportunities that exist for achieving fire access, but doing so in a way that doesn't impact some of the other elements we want to achieve along Joy Street, pickup drop-off areas, on-street parking, street trees, and doing so in a way that meets our goals, both in the sector plan and the MTP, as well as satisfying the fire marshal in this case. So that's something we're going to continue to look at as we get into SPRC. And I think the last slide we have is just a reminder that our next and final meeting will be November 16th. We're going to be right back here in this room to really conclude some of the feedback we've heard, have an applicant have a chance to summarize where they are ending up with these studies, and get ready for SPRC. So I'll stop there and hand it back to Jim.
Good, thank you, Matt. So it's now with the committee for discussions, and as Matt mentioned, transportation is going to be our focus tonight, starting now. I prefer that we not get into changes that were raised by the applicant. First, let's talk about transportation. If we have time after, we can start getting into those, but otherwise it'll be at the next meeting. We can get further into that. Anyway, so starting with transportation, we can start going around the room, or does anybody have something burning they'd like to just jump in right away with? Okay, Pam.
Sidewalks. Am I correct that on Big Joyce, you're planning a 10-foot clear zone?
I believe so. I don't
Which is
know if,
wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you. I'm very concerned that when it gets to Little Joyce, it is a 6-foot clear zone, because that is a continuation of this major pedestrian passageway. All of us who live in the area use that side of Joyce to get over to Pentagon City. So I strongly encourage you to get to the 8-foot that the county is proposing.
Great.
And for the sidewalks on the internal section south, we need sidewalks on all sides, and if you can get to 8 feet, that would be great. And it looks like in one of your sketches, you've actually successfully combined the green ribbon and Kent. And that looks great. So
Great, thank you.
I'm impressed. Thank you.
Okay, we probably have a number of topics we can cover with transportation. Pedestrian access sidewalks is certainly one big one. Bicycle facilities would be another. Parking would, I think, be a third. We should probably talk about the green ribbon, even though it touches on a number of these other things, as to routing adequacy, that sort of thing. I think that really touches the big things on, and I guess maybe where we're loading docks. I'm not sure that's really transportation, or pickup drop-off. I think that really is more transportation, so we can touch on that. Why don't we then start, since Pam kicked us off on pedestrian access, are there any other comments on pedestrian, the proposed pedestrian facilities? Because we have more than just sidewalks. We also have the stairway that was mentioned here, and that was an issue we discussed at the last meeting. It was raised at the last meeting too. And that's a connection up to Lynn Street, how that works. So anyway, I'm throwing that out there. If anybody has any other comments, and I think people in the condos, that is presumably one of your issues too. So I just don't, I want to make sure that I see that you're there if you do have something that you'd like to add. Yeah.
So Richard Rebb, on the north end of the property, there was a part of the green ribbon that went up to where Lynn connects to Army Navy. That's a bit of a hill. Are there steps planned for that, or how is that walkway planned?
It would be an ADA compliant. We'd have to resort to switchbacks there.
Okay.
We've already studied the grading there. That's what we have.
Okay. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just on a separate piece. I was going to say, I do obviously my understanding is you would move the stairs, so you would remove the existing stair and then replace it 180 feet, Yeah, I think that I like that combination of where you could do the ramp or the stair. I was trying to look at, I think the drawings are not totally updated on the connection of that green ribbon. But I just wanted to make sure that flow worked out well, right, with the green ribbon, that you would then naturally kind of go over those stairs. But I think an improvement to the stairs is positive.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to point out that arc to the bus stop is not part of the green ribbon. That is in addition, it's a circulation enhancement that is not a green ribbon.
Yeah, I think I've typed because isn't there a piece of the green ribbon?
It runs just east of it.
Yeah, and then it cuts through the end buildings, right?
Correct. It does both.
Yeah, so this drawing just didn't have your additional stair there. And I think some of the other ones had still the old stair connected. And so I just wanted to confirm.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. So right there, you still kind of have that old one, but just make sure that flow continues.
The old stair is going to go away, is
Yeah,
that correct?
correct.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
what
Yeah, and that's a much better ascent to Lynn Street than the new proposed stair. It's safer.
Okay, so there's now just the one staircase and the one crosswalk?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
It would be this one, that would be the new one.
Yeah.
The old one was here.
No.
Other way.
Other way, this one is.
That's the new
That's the
one.
new one.
The purple dot is the bus stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually thought the same thing. And these are actually, this is not a stair. These are the labels of the changes in topography. That's how steep the topography is.
Right.
These are literally the
Those are
numbers.
contours.
Those are numbers.
The mapping person I know.
The contour line, yeah, those are that's how dense the grade is there. So yeah, so that's actually the contour lines. This is the existing stair location and existing crosswalk location. And this is the proposed new crosswalk location, which would have the more gracious stairs as well as an alternative ADA compliant access.
And be affiliated with the bus stop.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, are you putting sidewalks on this side of Lynn too, here? To accommodate sort of resting area or anything? Because I know there's no sidewalk here right now.
Correct, yeah, there's no sidewalk. There's sort of a landing spot for that bus stop.
Okay.
And that's what we would maintain and provide the access to.
And you can't do the entire sidewalk.
I think not at the expense of a lot of foliage. I mean, that would take out a tremendous amount.
Forested edge comes really very close, as you probably know.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think
It drops off very
ultimately to be then sort of redundant with this section of the Green River that's providing that north-south connectivity.
I'm just looking at the stairs. Theoretically, if you extended that stairway connection so that it joined further to the north, you could have longer kind of landing areas, kind of a lower overall slope going down that hill, potentially even ramping, so that it may be connected closer to the junction of the, because people are going to walk down that path and they're heading, most of them, down to the area between the parks. So you don't have to get down to the Green Ribbon as quickly. I don't know what that does for the park area, but.
Our main consideration there with the alignment was the existing trees. Spreading between existing trees.
And the bus stops.
And get to the bus stop, but its route going eastward from
Okay.
there was really dependent partially
Okay.
on the trees.
Fewer trees impacted by just getting down to the Green Ribbon.
Correct.
Okay.
To first, with three people, okay, Theo, then Doris, and then.
Adam Theo, Transportation Commission, sitting in for Chris Slatt. Transportation Commission's main concerns on this appear to be with the bike facilities and bike paths. I've had a handful of points. They're all kind of related to the bike paths. One of which I think has already been addressed from what I saw. The realigned South Joyce Street, from what we saw earlier, did not seem to mention bike paths, but I did see in the cross section that is present. So that addresses one of our concerns right there. We would love to see those protected or dedicated bike paths along the realigned South Troy Street. One question though is, and I didn't catch this on the earlier slides, is bike paths along the main green ribbon cutting through east-west. I didn't see any mention of that. So we would love to see some more details on bike paths along the main green ribbon cutting east-west through the site. Especially when it gets to the proposed staircase going up, how does the proposed bike path, or how would any parallel bike path or bike path along the greenway interact with those stairs, approaching those staircases?
The new stair that we just discussed to Lynn?
Yeah, correct. Like where would the bike paths or any proposed bike paths along the main green ribbon, how close to that staircase, or how would it impact or be impacted by the staircases? Since I didn't see where there would be a bike path running east to west through the site, I just want to make sure that, someone is riding along east to west and then hit some stairs before they have to go around to the rest of the bike path.
Right, I don't think I'm following. There is a continuous green ribbon, which is completely ADA compliant and multimodal. So there is a continuous path for north, south, and east.
The main one east-west?
Correct.
Okay.
It doesn't intersect with stairs.
Okay, so it just gets to that green ribbon that's on the west side of the site, and then people can connect.
Correct.
Without having to hit that staircase.
Right.
All the way to the 15th Street spur.
Yes.
Not clear from your drawings.
Yeah, can
Okay.
you,
So
do you
the-
mind pointing to what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I'm confused, I was confused.
So,
So obviously the green dots are the green ribbon, and the primary green ribbon running east-west is shown there.
Which on the map is top to bottom.
Correct, top to bottom. There you go, yes.
The biggest stops.
Exactly.
And that one is fine for bikes.
Yes.
Okay.
Separate track.
Yes, and that I was talking about in between the central land bay buildings, how there was a 12-foot pathway for cyclists and a separate 6-foot pathway for pedestrians.
Okay, and that's still the case? Oh, sorry.
Is it thought that the Woodland Walk will accommodate cyclists, or is that mostly thought to be pedestrian?
It's supposed to be multimodal.
Okay, so it can
It
accommodate
can
both.
be shared,
Okay.
yes.
But I think just, Adam, to come back to your question around this section here.
Okay, right there.
Yeah, so, and I think we just need to be specific, Sharon, too, on how we're describing it. So we have the width where we could do sort of the type of separated cycle track that we have on Joyce Street, right? Where you have a true physical barrier separating the cyclists from the rest of the traffic. And we had a similar question arise on Penn Place, where we had, that sort of first section of the green ribbon going through the plaza there. And there, the solution we wound up, we settled on was a sort of shared multimodal use path.
Routing through Penn Place, right?
Yeah, routed through Penn Place, because we didn't feel on that site plan, and I would not feel also on this one that there's the same need for a physical barrier for the cyclists. And so it is a shared multimodal use path going through that open space. It is not a physically separated cycle track like we have on Big Joyce Street.
All right. I know Transportation Commission might have some more comments along this.
Sure, yeah, no, I think there's definitely room to.
Since according to the sector plan also it sort of called for dedicated bike paths.
Yeah.
So trying to lump it in with pedestrian paths as well may cause some problems.
This is the section, right?
Correct.
In the presentation, yeah. So that's between the two, C3 and C2 buildings.
Right.
Sorry, it's small.
There's another one that shows the two different ones. They weave back and forth because, so we did want to provide some separation, so there is respite if people do not want to interact very much. They cross twice, it crosses twice.
And I think that might be fine. After all, we don't expect cyclists to be like speeding along and sort of like some speed track type of thing. But as long as it is separated, physically separated from pedestrian spaces, so there's not this constant collision or potential collisions every 5 feet or so.
Right, and we felt that given the streets at either end, east and west of this space, you're not going to be at high speeds as a cyclist. It wouldn't be appropriate for cyclists to be moving at high speeds. So recreational cycling on that 12-foot multimodal path, we're showing both because we do feel, as Matt said, that this could accommodate both. But there is also that 6-foot secondary path that you see on the left. And can you go to the plan view?
Yeah.
And you can see how those interact with each other. So the darker gray is the 12-foot path, and then the lighter gray is the pedestrian path with areas of respite that you could sit down at a bench and be off the cycling path. And they're also separated from each other in a lot of places vertically, as the section showed.
Part of that's by necessity, I think I recall, because the multimodal path can have steeper grade, but the pedestrian path, in order to ensure that it's ADA accessible, has to have a few more switchbacks.
Right, and we did, through that space, wanted to avoid switchbacks. We couldn't avoid them at the far east end, but everything else in there is less than 5%. So we're not creating true ramps, handrails, all that visual clutter. It's sort of universal accessibility moving through the space.
What happens west of Kent? Is that still a multi-use path?
Yes, it moves. That's the 15th Street spur study that we did.
And how wide is that?
And that 8 feet minimum.
Okay, and that, again, there's no separation of the multimodal there, right?
There isn't. Going up this, we'd have to lose a lot of trees if we
Right, and it's
separate
steep
those.
and you're not going to be going fast.
What kind
Correct.
of grade is that? Once you
It's
get the,
about 15% if you were to go
Whoa.
straight up the slope.
okay. But with the current switchbacks.
It's less than 5%, no true ramps.
But it's a tricky thing for a bike to do a switchback.
Right, it's a gentle, it's not folded back on itself, and that was why we
So
were trying to get
is
back
it
to
likely that a cyclist going between the C buildings when they get to Kent, rather than knowing that I have this switchbacks ahead, are they just going to take a right and go up Kent to Lynn?
That's-
It probably depends on the cyclist, right? You know, like
Right.
the cyclist, yes, is going to take the right. You know, the casual bike rider might decide, you know what?
Yeah,
I'll
wait till they get to the first switchback.
Exactly.
And then they're pushing their bike.
But they might
up
walk,
the way.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
And the orange dots, in fact, that you see on this plan indicate a sharrow, where it's, and we have this a lot in the shared road. Because again, it's a slow speed road.
Right.
And many of the other roads in the county are considered to be appropriate for this, and we thought that Kent Street extended and Joyce realigned would be appropriate travel speeds to accommodate that.
Does the Sharrow imply that there's a marking on the pavement to say you're sharing with a bike?
I think so.
Should have a show
Yes.
mark. It looks like little mountains.
Yeah.
Okay.
I took quite a few here on my bike.
Okay.
It's just arrows.
Okay, this is a little bit of this,
Okay.
so it gets into, I think, site plan type details.
Okay, sorry.
But before we get to Doris, I want to remind people who are virtual, please turn off your cameras if you're not speaking. Reserve bandwidth. So Doris, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, from transportation and circulation perspective, whether in developing this project or others, particularly down there in Crystal City, Pentagon City, whether there is an analysis done of the juxtaposition of pedestrian rights of way, the sidewalks, versus the MDD, micromobility, and bicycle lanes versus the vehicular way, in terms of how a pedestrian, whether with a disability or without a disability, is able to have a taxi or a star vehicle or a just somebody driving me home or driving me to work, let them off without presenting hazards for people with disabilities. And then I'm also interested in whether you look at, you know, the neighborhood and how a pedestrian is going to cross through all the mix of the various transportation lanes to get to essential services around like a new apartment, residential project, so that you can get to the subway or wherever, because my perception as a new resident of Crystal City, actually during the workday, because I work down there now, is that it is pretty difficult, obstacle laden for people with physical disabilities and sensory disabilities to navigate when they're somebody is letting them off, but also just to navigate the streets. And I'm also interested in, there's a lot of complex intersections down there. To what degree are you going to utilize accessible and audible signals and put that in also as a new community benefit? And then with regard to the bike trails, bike paths, will they accommodate bike riders who have adaptive bicycles? Because there's going to be any number of a pretty large influx of employees coming to Amazon. They have a big and other retail and residential, not residential, commercial buildings that will be down there, and they will need, at least where there are bike trails, they will want to utilize those bike trails and not necessarily be considered somebody who has an adapted bike is not a pedestrian or wheelchair user using a pedestrian path. They are cyclists. So those are the kinds of things, and I don't know whether we've studied them before, but I think in the new inclusive community environment, they should be, and as well as how the pedestrian rights of way are going to be affected, before they're built by sidewalk features such as the plantings that are set up right in front of my building. There's a planting, and it's the only place that a taxi can pull up. And then they're right in the middle of the sidewalk. There's a step, so it makes it, the person with a disability has to walk further to get to where they're going. So those are the kinds of things I would like to see, particularly here in Crystal City, Pentagon City, and throughout the process.
Okay. Thanks. A couple of questions. What is, going back, follow up on some of the bicycle planning questions that Theo started with, so that's on when, I guess maybe this is for the applicant, when would what we're calling, or what you call Big Joyce, when is that going to be delivered? And if not known, when would we know? And how is the timing going to be memorialized?
My expectation, and I will have to figure this out with staff, but that will come in sections along with those end buildings, the Land Bay end buildings. And that's because in order to put that in, we're going to effectively have to eat into the RiverHouse site a little bit, including the RiverHouse parking. And so when we're building those Land Bay end buildings, we're going to build them in 2 phases. And one, the building that's a little bit to the south, is almost certainly going to be the one that would go first. And that building both delivers the new apartments, it delivers the parking for those new apartments, but it also delivers replacement parking. That replacement parking is what enables us then to start on the second phase of N2. So I think the sections of Big Joyce will need to come in sections with those two phases.
And I'm sure you've told me this before, but I've forgotten.
Yeah.
Or perhaps we've postponed it to staging. Do you have a sense of which of the bays are going to go first versus last?
We don't, right, because I think that if we could predict interest rates and construction costs, right, I'd be able to give you that answer. But conceptually, our goal, sort of our team and JVG's goal would be for some combination of Land Bay N and 1 and some section of Land Bay S, the rental townhomes, to be in the first phase. The two central buildings, the senior housing building and the condo building, are product types that we are most likely not going to be the developer for. And in addition, they sit in the current location of our residential amenity. So in order to minimize disruption, we would like to build the new amenity that is associated with building N1 in the first phase.
In terms of when we'll know that and how it's memorialized, my assumption is it'll be in the site plan conditions that are approved, the PDSP conditions approved by the board.
I figured that would be the answer, but I didn't want to lead the witness.
That's a legal term, Gad.
Watches a lot over.
Yeah, we're moving back here now. Identify yourself also.
Hi, good evening. I'm Tina Galati from Pentagon Ridge Condominium Association. I'm representing Karen Feely, our president. She sends her apologies for not making it tonight because we have a budget meeting. I have 4 questions that are all transportation related, and the first 2 are the most important, but they're very quick ones. The first one, if we can go to the applicant's slide 6, we have a question about the 15th Street spur. So if you look at the top where the arrowhead is, you were just there, I think. Similar, yes. If you look at the very top of the green arrow, where the arrowhead is, where it says 15th Street spur, that path is right outside our garages, which are our only means of ingress and egress to the building. It's not just for our cars, it's where our trash and recycling is picked up. It's also where we have passenger loading, unloading, and deliveries as well. The way that looks, it looks like that path, the green dotted line, is feeding into that. What are you doing to mitigate conflicts between the traffic that is coming in and out of our building to folks that might be biking or walking up? Is it going to be tapered? Are you putting a speed bump there, maybe a gate, something to that effect? Because we certainly don't want to hit even our own folks. I mean, we want this connectivity so we can go to West Coast, we can walk to the metro. So we're not against the pathway, but we are very concerned about, you don't want to hit anybody. So that's question 1. I don't think you want me to hear all my questions. You're going to answer them one by one, but that's my first question, our first question.
Great question. I'll probably turn that over to Sharon. I'll say first, thank you for, you guys raised that when the previous times we came and visited you. Definitely something we want to make sure we don't want those conflicts. And I think something we talked about with Sharon and the whole design team is how does the Green Ribbon sort of change character as it approaches different adjacencies. So I don't know if we've got that level of design, but Sharon, I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Right, and we have to study those edge conditions because in some cases it is part of a larger green ribbon network where it just continues on as a green ribbon further out. But in some cases, like this one, it comes to an end, and we have to study that edge condition and how we safely bring people off a pedestrian-only path into a very shared service vehicles, drop-offs, everything else. How do they move safely?
And I know the grade is very steep there too. So there's a visibility issue.
And also, even though 15th Street South is a public street, because it's right in front of our garage entrances, we pay for the snow plowing, and we haven't asked the county for a tax credit, but we probably will. We also have pet waste disposal, which folks in the neighborhood, and we're neighborly, and we don't want your pet waste on our lawn, so we're happy to pay for that. However, there is a lot of litter and some nefarious activities sometimes happen between our garage entrances and that and to the rear parking lots behind
The
the Joyce
jungle.
building, the jungle, right?
Yes.
So, again, whatever we can do to taper some of that activity. So again, that we're not, we want the access, but we don't want it to become, motor speedway, so
So
to
let me jump in,
speak,
this
or
actually sounds like it might be a design issue.
And this could go to
SPR,
site
so that would be
plan,
SPR.
site plan, right, but we did want to raise it now because it is
Yeah.
part of the
Yeah.
transportation
The sooner they
conversation.
think about it, the better, so
Right,
that's great,
right,
but
right.
we're not gonna resolve
Right,
this
right,
tonight.
no, I'm not asking
Okay.
for a solution. And then the second concern is about the bus stops on South Lynn Street. There is a bus stop 10E right in front of our building. Just a few feet later is the shelter. And I'm talking about the east side of South Lynn Street heading towards the east. So in front of Pentagon Ridge Condominium, there is a bus stop 10E directly in front of us. There is one just a few feet later at the bus shelter, and then even a few feet. So there are 3 stops very close together. Have you had any conversations with LaMotta about consolidating a couple of those stops, like perhaps removing the one in front of our building? It gets very little usage. Even that bus shelter gets very little usage. I don't know if you have statistics, but as someone who's lived there for 23 years on both sides of Lynn Street, I can tell you, but I do think we should have a bus stop and it should be accessible, but having 3 within so many feet, I think even for someone who has physical challenges would even say that that's too many stops in too short a span.
I'll say we have not had those conversations with MATA. I'd say generally I'm not going to have a lot of success probably like convincing them to remove one of their stops, but we're going to need to have some coordination with them. So happy to get information on that as we go through the process.
Is this something DES would be involved in, Chief?
Yeah, we could look at potential stop consolidation. I believe that the comments on the site plan application include some from our transit team that
Okay, great.
may or may not be relevant to this particular discussion, but could lead to a more productive discussion.
Also, there is currently some pedestrian sidewalk and crosswalk improvements on Arlington Ridge Road and Lynn Street, which has even made that 10E bus stop in front of Pentagon Ridge less practical. The bus doesn't have much room to pull over, and it will back up all the traffic on the east, again, the eastbound side of South Arlington Ridge Road. So then now the third of the 4th questions is, now looking at the RiverHouse site specifically, the question has to do with ride sharing and car sharing. So for ride sharing, if you go to especially what is the building? The Potomac on a Friday night or Saturday night, it is just Ubers, and which is great. We don't want a lot of cars, but Ubers picking up and dropping off, and it's very hard if you're a pedestrian to walk to West Post. I'm trying not to say Pentagon Road, but walking to West Post and navigating these Ubers and Lyfts that are not familiar. Are you going to have pull-offs so that they can do safe pickup and drop-off of the ride-sharing passengers? And the second part of that question was, years ago, there were Zipcar, and I know Zipcar is not operating right now in Arlington County, but if car sharing comes back, because we want to be car light, if not car free, are you going to reserve some spots for there to be, because there used to be spots on RiverHouse property for Zipcar, Car2Go. But so it's the ride sharing and the car sharing. Do you have comments about that?
Yeah, so I'd say on the rideshare pickup drop off, I know we're going to get grilled on that in So yes, we have done some analysis and have some thoughts on where we think those pickup drop off locations can go. Both, we'd love to reserve a lot of the existing lay-by that we have for the existing buildings because that functions well for that purpose. And then for the new buildings, we're thinking about where those can go, including alternatives to the public right of way. And then as it relates to car share, I don't think that's still a standard site plan condition to reserve spaces for car share. It used to be, yeah, but I think with the failing of some of those operators that went away. However, most likely, JBG, we have a car share program in our portfolio. With EV. And it's proven very, yeah. Yeah, and it's basically, they have a fleet of Teslas and, we started with, I think, a couple per property. And we've basically doubled it to, I think, like depending on the property, anywhere from like 4 to 10, because it's been very popular and we've seen a lot of utilization. So I expect we will.
And fourth and final question is about the underground parking in the new buildings. Will they be designed in such a way that two cars, incoming and outgoing, can both go at the same time and not have to look at the mirrors to sneak around? I'm referencing the Gramercy and the Bartlett buildings where if you're going to Whole Foods or if you're using the retail where, Epic Steakhouse and Dunkin' is, it's very hard for two cars to pass each other. Are you designing, or do you have plans, and maybe that is an SPRC
Well, yeah, but Murphy can answer that.
but is it, generally, are you have that concept in mind?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, and those garages have been sized to be efficient, straightforward garages. It's a little harder under bigger buildings like some of the ones you're saying.
But and I was like, a big difference from Met Park is where you guys have located the garage entries is not directly on these really busy sidewalks. It's off of them. So I think that should help as well.
Which will help the pickup and drop off as well.
Thank you.
Steve, sidewalks question. With respect to the narrow sidewalks that the staff alluded to, 4.5 feet as opposed to 8 feet is quite a bit of difference. Will there also be a consequent reduction in the planting area? Will street trees be affected?
So I think it's sort of the reverse, and I'll let Sharon dig into more. I'd say from a strategy standpoint, from a site-wide standpoint, our goal, and we got to make sure that we've done this in all the locations, was to provide the sector plan 8-foot sidewalk where the sector plan had those big, sort of thoroughfare sidewalks. It's really as it relates to internal circulation within the rental townhome section in Lambay, where if that was a multifamily building, as envisioned by the sector plan, it would be a row of apartment doors off of a 5-foot corridor. Instead of having that 5-foot corridor, we have 15 to 20 feet of outdoor space. And that's a combination of, a sidewalk and then planting area. And given how low traffic we expect those areas to be, that they'll be serving, in some areas, dozens or less of people a day, we thought, let's skinny up the concrete and maximize the planting. But I think we're open to, reevaluating that balance. So I think it really depends. But I do think we need to drill down into the locations and decide, is this a place where if we need wider sidewalks, we'll put them in. I think we've got the width to accommodate that, and it's really just where are the locations where we need 8 feet, because it's going to be connecting people, through the neighborhood versus where is it really just taking people from the thoroughfare sidewalk to their individual doorstep. And then it's more akin to a sidewalk you might see in some of Arlington's older single-family home neighborhoods that are typically 4 to 6 feet wide. Any other thoughts, Sharon?
No.
Okay.
Not 4.5, that's not good.
Remember? First Doris and then you. Doris.
Similarly to the questions being asked, I'm wondering whether if there are rideshare stands down in this area, will there be taxi stands? And the reason I ask this is because I understand that the taxi drivers are telling me there aren't taxi stands. And like up in Clarendon, if you're up there enjoying the amenities up there, having some dinner or something, there's no taxi stand. And so times when I've left my office in Crystal City to go wherever, particularly in the evening, there appears to be no taxi stand there, and it seems somehow very unfair. The taxi drivers say that they aren't allowed to park where Uber and Lyft are parking. Is that true?
I don't know anything about that, Jane.
I mean, is there a policy?
DS, the.
I don't think
Arlington,
there's
why?
an explicit policy. You generally, Uber and Lyft drivers park in short-term on-street parking spaces that are marked for explicit pickup and drop-off, which I would think would include taxi drivers or taxis. And so if that's the case, I would have the taxi folks reach out to our liaison at the county or the taxi drivers group to clarify what some of that street signage.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm understanding your answer about whether they've taken away the taxi stands for that Uber and Lyft stands, so are you saying yes or no?
I think what we're hearing is that the current regulations or signage does not distinguish between Uber, Lyft, or taxis. So it's really just short-term parking.
The closest taxi stand in the neighborhood is in front of the Ritz-Carlton in Nordstrom in the west side of 22202 if you're in RiverHouse. If you want to just get a taxi without calling, you have to walk to right in front of Nordstrom. On the Hayes Street side is where you get that, but that is far. So it's a difficult walk because you have to walk past the parking gates in front of Fashion Center. So, but that is the closest taxi stand to RiverHouse.
Thank you. Your turn?
Hi, I'm Tarcy Dunlop with the Vice President, Crystal City Civic Association. I have a question about metro access, and maybe this is mostly for the county, for Matt. In terms of if there's been any conversation with the owners of the Pentagon City Mall about improving the metro access point from the metro to over to RiverHouse through either through the mall or around the mall in terms of Wayward and Sign Ferry.
Yeah, this issue came up during the Pentagon City Sector planning effort.
Many times.
Yes. It does involve multiple property owners to work in that consolidated common goal, which they do share. I think the challenge that we have is that it would involve some level of disruption to the large parking structure and likely introduction of some redevelopment in that block behind West Post, which is not impossible, and it is anticipated in the sector plan. And I think we've tried to, with that property owner at the table, set aside some expectations and parameters for that, how that could happen. At the time of that planning effort, we were told that that could be one of their earlier phases if and when they would be ready to pursue something, some level of change. It wouldn't be, I think, the most convenient access way. It's just simply doing the best they can in the type of intervention that would involve in terms of maintaining their parking structure, which is a critical component of the current operations, but doing so in a way that at least improves the current game that has to be played in order to get from A to B, Metro.
Anything else? Thanks, Darcy. Yeah, and then.
I'm happy to wait.
Okay.
I was just going to say one thing real quickly, just to remind folks, this is the LRPC section of the discussion. We are going to have a whole separate one or more SPRCs where we get into the real detail. And I understand people want to know, exactly what it's going to look like, feel like, what those details are going to be. But the reason we don't always have the most minute level of detail is just on some of these answers because we're just not there yet. So just
Exactly, and that's why it's appropriate to raise so you're aware those are going to be coming up.
Absolutely.
So you're prepared for them. But like I said earlier, don't expect answers tonight for most of these questions because they really are more detailed oriented.
I'm Alyssa Tope with the Public Art Committee, although this is not a public art question. For the secondary street that circulates just around the townhomes, I was curious if you guys had looked into, rather than having the traditional street sidewalk, since it would be a thin sidewalk anyway, if it could be a shared street instead, because it is so low trafficked and would be more
Yes,
pleasant.
Sharon and Hybrid were just batting around some precedents today, because I think we know there's some work to be done there to make that work, so yes.
Right, I have the same question because I know it was raised earlier that there doesn't seem to be sidewalk on at least one side of that street.
Yeah, we need to.
I was wondering whether there would be design solutions
given this is going to be low traffic, not a cut through, it's sort of an out of the way, mostly for the residents there. If there's some creative way there could be interesting design.
An actual winner.
An actual winner.
Yeah.
And the requirement is a requirement that all
I buried that word, I think I forgot. Let's resurrect.
Wait, where are we talking about?
So this is as it relates to, let me just pull up our site plan here, and, you know, we have to either start making our, PDFs like hyper dark and contrasted, or the screen has to get fixed, because everything is so washed out on this.
Yeah, I think it's the screen.
So I think we just need to start to make, well, I mean, you can,
Usually by the county and the screen.
yeah, I mean, yeah,
You're gonna be
yeah.
here enough.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's really, this access road that I'm literally tracing here, that really just serves these townhomes and provides access to the various parking garages within the townhomes. And I think it's a great idea, and one we're looking at too is how do we make that something not just asphalt, you know, and make it a shared space.
Just a
Now,
really
remember, there
successful
are probably going to
precedent
be
for this and other
FedEx and UPS trucks on there all the time too. So it has to accommodate.
It has to accommodate,
Yeah.
yeah. I think Matt said it really nicely, that we want to accommodate vehicles, but not design around them.
Right, I guess, I love that.
Yeah, hi, Nick Jacoby from Aurora Highlands. I have a transition question. Joyce Street, as it's redesigned, is very different from the way it is now. And how does that then transition into 15th Street, which doesn't seem to be redesigned, or is the county undertaking a separate redesign of the 15th Street side to meet up with Joyce Street?
So there is a capital project for 15th Street. However, given the new cross-section for Joyce with this site plan, well, when it comes, right?
Yeah.
There is now, on the county side, some discussions happening about the current plan to just be a marking improvement until we have enough funding to then kind of complete 15th to match kind of what's being done on Joyce with the private development. I think the big benefit would be a continuous cycle track down 15th, whereas the interim condition would require a split facility. But ultimately, you know, we are looking to see if that is a feasible option, given funding and timing and all of the things that go into deciding the capital project side of things. But we are internally discussing kind of the vision for 15th, given that this project is now coming, right? Like the planning for the current project started 10 years ago. And so, you know, now that we know what's happening, we want to make sure the county is not going to build something that's not compatible with something else, but also to provide an interim condition that allows a smooth transition between, you know, the new and the existing.
So you might cut some of the lanes there on 15th as well.
We may look to do that.
that'd be great.
You know, we just, you know, the data that we get from J.D. Smith and look at for the MMTA would still apply, you know, going down 15th. And so given that information, we can, you know, make a better decision on continuing a cross-section that's being introduced or modifying it, you know, however we need to on our end. And so all of that is now kind of within the transportation planning and capital project group to, you know, dig into further.
And on that similar note, I am a little confused. Well, first I really, on Big Joyce, love the protected bike lanes. I love protected bike lanes because of pickup, drop off, other people doing other weird things. It is terrifying, right, to be on a non-protected bike lane. Crystal Drive. So I am interested, however, with the little Joyce or whatever we're calling it. How do those bike lanes transition from the protected? Like, are they going to continue into that, or are the bicyclists are now going to be sent kind of a new way through the green ribbon, although I feel like the people still wanted to go south or north. I was a little confused by how that would work out.
Yeah, I don't know if Chris was sharing you on anything, but I mean, it's a two-way protected cycle track along South Joyce Street. And then Little Joyce, as of right now, that's anticipated to be a shared, it's a low-speed road, so therefore it's bikes and cars are sharing that same road.
So
That
not
would be a
even a bike
Sharrow?
lane at all.
No.
A Sharrow along Little Joyce?
I
I
assume that's
know,
the,
the first, the northernmost, I think that's what you're probably about to say, the
Yeah, I was
northernmost
wondering
are,
about what the side view
is,
that I saw earlier.
I
I
think
thought that was
was-
Little Joyce. That wasn't Little Joyce, that was Big
there
Joyce?
was a little- I think projected, there was a little spur of the.
So the sector
dedicated bike.
plan does show a little spur there, between Big Joyce and, I'm gonna call it the green ribbon,
right here, yeah.
right? So that,
Mhm.
so I think, again, I believe it's in the comments that we sent today, yesterday, that we are looking to see some sort of continual facility for that spur. But then south of the green ribbon, a Sharrow or some other low-tech infrastructure would be appropriate. So I think that we are still in discussion.
Yeah, so-
Because the sector plan does call out that spur, and we do want to make sure, again, that people coming off of Big Joyce are, kind of having them go towards the green ribbon is a little bit
Okay, I'd
the
like to jump
preferred
in.
path, and I think we will continue the conversation.
Because my 2 cents, Sharrows are to be avoided wherever we can, especially here, we have a very dense urban area of all of National Landing, really. So avoiding Sharrows within the entire border of National Landing is, I think, something we should really try very hard to accomplish.
I'll say that the existing and projected future traffic volumes on the section of Little Joyce that is south of the Green Ribbon, and in fact, even north of the Green Ribbon, are so low. They're much closer to the traffic counts on Joyce Street as it goes down into Aurora Highlands.
But heard the comments, and we'll study adding protected cycle track there, or protected bike facility.
In that spur you're saying,
And
and
this
then
spur
maybe
right
it turn
here.
into a non-protected or something
Yeah.
after, yeah.
I just want to concur with your comments, Jim, and say volume is appreciated, that data, but it's not just volume, it's intensity of the use. And I was actually sharing with Daniel, I feel more dangerous on the quiet residential streets often than I do on the busier streets because cars will just blow right through and they're less concerned oftentimes versus busier streets where they have to be more vigilant. So I would say, as somebody who cycles a lot, I'm more scared of single family neighborhood streets often. So I would appreciate avoiding Sharrows. Thanks.
Also, I'll just note on the Sharrows on the part of Little Joyce south of the green ribbon, I believe that's the part of the new rerouted Joyce Street, which would be going right up next to the southernmost RiverHouse building, basically that pull-up, pickup drop-off spot. Sharrows would be a disaster right there. I mean, so many vehicles, even if it's a low volume, just coming right in to pick up and drop off people right there at the building, that'd be a disaster.
Is low speed street, is that the term that's been used to describe Little Joyce? Is that a defined
Low
term?
volume, I think.
Sorry?
I think they said low volume.
I think MTP wise, it would be a non-arterial neighborhood street.
So we're not, so
So that,
So Little Joyce would most likely have a 25 mph speed cap. Yeah, so I want to echo Eric's sentiment that that's going to be, no, I don't think anyone's going to think that that's safe. If it's treated just as, it's treated like 9th Street a block east of us, it's not going to be, that's it.
It doesn't feel safe now. So it's not going to feel safer.
Not for any modality.
But certainly not for bikes.
But that's
Joyce is so narrow.
That's more of a
And you
comment.
got people parking on both sides, and cars, you can't even get cars going both ways. One of them has to stop and let the other one go through.
Well, I'm fine with a yield street. What I'm not fine with
But there's no
is,
place for bikes at all.
what I'm not fine with is a street that's wide enough to not be a yield street, and not have any facilities, right? Especially if there's any kind of topography. I mean, I was almost in a head-on this morning because a vehicle was coming up a crest at 35 miles an hour, dead center of a street that was wide enough where that kind of thing was tempting to do. So I guess that's more of a comment in the direction of DES staff than it is in the direction of the applicant. But take note, I guess.
I think, just building on what Jane said, we've submitted comments and we'll work with the applicant because on Little Joyce, for instance, we're looking at the overall cross section. I think we have comments about the geometry. We have comments about curb cuts. Can some be consolidated? Some may need to stay for fire access reasons for existing buildings, for instance. But comment is well taken. I think we're going to be working to resolve it.
And I do think the proposed curb to curb of Little Joyce could accommodate more than Sharrow's. It's just then you don't have parking, right? I mean, there's a give and take there, and there's also now an expanded, park that's going to be there, and maybe people want parking alongside the park versus a bike lane. I don't know. We'll talk about it at SPRC, I'm sure.
Well, I guess one thing I hope that DES does, at least when it comes to pushing back against the fire marshal, is to remember that the current fire code that Virginia has adopted allows for 10-foot wide travel lanes where the purpose is traffic control. I know that the fire chief doesn't like that reading, but the fire chief is wrong. And is ignoring the commentary and related language. So I'm just frustrated, and I'm frustrated in your general direction, for which I apologize, that you have to be in that direction right now. Not act, just toward it.
I feel it, Daniel. I
So
feel
anyway,
it.
We'll send them your regards.
Yeah, it's now 10:38. We have a lot of people here. I think what we might want to do is
8:38.
8:38, yes. It hasn't been that long.
Way past my bedtime.
Why don't we take some time now, a lot of people here, go around, see if there's any final comments before we get to public comments, so we can be within our time limits. So why don't we start back here, Tulsi, do you have anything final?
I just want to apply that same comment that had to do with bus stops and rideshare and taxis, because I understand there is going to be some limited retail at N1 and N2. What the impact will be across the street at West Coast, there is a 10A bus stop, and there's constant double parking there because of Ubers and Lyfts and people just running in and out. So I'm just curious, what's going to happen on that east side of South Joy Street that's right in front of the DSW, the TJ Maxx, for the 10A bus stop. There is a lot of double parking there already, so I'm worried that that's going to increase with folks trying to run into the retail in N1 and N2. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doris, your final comment? Do you have any final comments?
Yes. I reiterate my earlier comments about pedestrian rights of way and transportation and circulation, but I also want to comment that when we're doing planning like this, do we consider lighting in a neighborhood around, a big site like this? Because I want to comment that the use these days of high intensity fluorescent colored, white, blue lights is a real concern for people who are blind and vision impaired like myself and some other other folks, both seniors and younger people who have light-sensitive disabilities. And I was wondering what's going to be used here and looking at alternatives that use yellow light, warm light, rather than the new high intensities. All you have to do is look at the lobby of this building and see how it blinds people when they're walking through there.
Thank you. Final comments?
I agree with, as a visually impaired person myself, the high intensity is almost blinding.
Daniel, you're next. Final comments? Eric, final comments?
Just, thinking about the intersection of the green ribbon and the bike path, and I'd like to think about that more, but I think I've been persuaded that given the use, probably personally okay with it, given the speed of the bikes going through there. So we'll continue to engage on that. Thanks.
Leo?
Yeah, I'd like to commend and support and encourage the gentler grades as a use in general to avoid both curbs and handrails as much as possible.
And next, we didn't get a chance to touch on it at SPRC, but I am concerned about the pickup and drop off and where the lobbies are located in the buildings, and that the pickup and drop off do not kind of impair the ability to get in and out of the garage. So I realize those details are SPRC, but I'd like to see how that's going to get done.
Okay. Ms. Van Hyne?
Thank you. I think the green ribbons are coming along very nicely. Thank you for all the work you've done on that. And I like the idea of making the little street that's a dead end into a wooder. That'd be great. And be greener too. Greener, and anyone can use it. I would find it useful at some point to have layouts that show what all the pedestrian passages are, what all the bike passages are, what all the driving passages are, how the loading works, where big trucks go, where does a fire engine go. Not clear to me from what you're saying so far. Don't necessarily need it for LRPC, but we definitely need that. Thank you. Thank you, big brother. And Doris had wonderful comments that we should all pay attention to.
Yes, I want to second what Pam was saying. I think you're doing great work on the green ribbon. You're the first ones out of the box, so you get to fill in all of the holes between the guidelines in the Pentagon City Sector Plan. And I really look forward to the SPRC when we talk about the details of things like wayfinding, things like public art, things like respite areas, and how those designs will then be used by the other areas in the city sectors. Keep it up.
So appreciate all the discussion on pedestrian and bicycle transit, and I really appreciate the openness to kind of making changes and improving, accessibility, and to include the stuff you did before the meeting, especially kind of the accessibility to the neighborhoods of obviously Aurora Highlands and also Arlington Ridge. We didn't talk about it, but I still do really appreciate that connection to that Hume stair. And obviously making that an easily transitable area as well. So thank you guys. And I also second Pam's request for kind of a map to better understand, the different accessibility and transit.
Nothing but me.
I really love the changes you've made for I think it's the east-west pedestrian connection where you've kind of merged between having an accessible ramp, but also expanding beach sheds. So I think that looks really promising.
Theo?
Yep, just reiterating the protected separated bike facilities along the Greenway east-west through the site, and also along the southern portion of Little Joyce south of 15th Street, which was marked as Sharrow's potentially, but want to push back on that.
I think we've hit everybody who's at the table here. Next, we will do our public comments.
Online too.
Yeah, we have, first our online people. If you had signed up, could you tell us who it is so we can call the first person? It'll be 2 minutes per person.
So the first well, the first and only is Maya?
Yeah, Maya's correct.
Very good.
I have two questions. I'm not sure how the 2-minute time period works in relation to that.
You can start right now. You have 2 minutes to give us your comments.
Okay, I'll just read them straight through, and if you guys need a refresher when I'm done, I will repeat myself. Okay, so I have two questions. One is transportation related and one is not. The first is about parking lots. This plan includes, I should rewind and say I'm a 5-year resident of RiverHouse. So that's where these questions are coming from. So this plan includes taking out all of the current surface lots where hundreds of residents currently park. And I am really curious to know if JBG has a plan for where those residents can safely park those cars in close proximity to their buildings throughout the course of construction. The rest of my comments are not transportation related, but I still think are important. So for the last 5 years, my partner and I have called RiverHouse our home, and we chose this neighborhood because it was one of the few affordable places in Arlington to live. But over the past 5 years, we've seen approximately 60% increase in our rent. And at a time when Arlington has become one of the most expensive places to live in the entire country, I and many other residents have a lot of concerns about how massive projects like these will inevitably hike the cost of living, and I'm curious as to how JBG plans to address this issue. And I'm also really concerned with the ability of JBG to manage a property of this magnitude. And in my and many other residents' opinions, they're already struggling to manage the 3 properties that currently exist on RiverHouse's campus. In my building alone, we chronically have broken doors, broken outdoor furniture, broken gym equipment, non-functioning AC, chronic leaks, broken fire pits, broken elevators that get stuck with residents inside, broken package lockers, electric hazards. You get the gist. And over the last 2 years, we've also seen a lot of cars broken into, cars and tires stolen in our surface lots, as well as a 25% increase in our monthly parking fees. Our parking lots have no security cameras, minimal overhead lighting, easy access to outsiders, and have a severe lack of security. And we've been told the people conducting said crime have been known to carry guns, which is not just a concern for the safety of residents' vehicles, but for our lives. And when we've suggested JBG utilize the extra money they're bringing in from increased parking fees and rent to improve safety, I'm almost done. I have like 2 more sentences. We've been told by multiple senior staff members that JBG views that as a waste of money because they're focusing solely on this construction project that has not been approved yet. So as a concerned resident of RiverHouse, I'm wondering if there is a plan to ensure that prices on current RiverHouse properties remain affordable while infrastructure and safety needs within our current buildings are met prior to, throughout, and beyond the duration of construction.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have anybody else online?
Nobody else online.
Okay, within the room here.
We have, I hope I'm saying this right.
Maritza. Hi.
Hi.
I have a question as to the handicap parking. I'm in the Potomac, and there's handicap parking right in front of the building. Okay, people who are in the garage who are handicapped, it's not accessible for them. Bonnie has had that issue. If they're going to be building there, what are we doing with the handicap parking? Because not everybody's going to be going into the garage. So how are we handling that so that they have accessibility? And the other question is, oh, I lost it. How are we? Right now, with all that outdoor parking, and I park in the garage, so my parking's fine. But with all the outdoor parking, where is everybody going to be? People who park there now, where are they going to be able to park while this is happening? Because there's no place for them to go. Then you've got all the construction. You've got all the big equipment. You've got the construction workers. Where are they going to be parking? So what are we doing with all of that so that people who live there can still be comfortable, you know, and not have to deal with it? And then somebody was concerned about ride sharing. The concern is because those are residents who are choosing not to drive and calling an Uber and saying, hey, come pick me up. So I'm not sure what the issue is because these are people who live in the building. So, you know, somebody was saying there's too many Uber drivers coming in. Yeah, but we live in the building. So they're coming into the lobby and they're not driving. I'm not getting it.
They have no place to pull over. That was the comment.
No, but they do. They're pulling over underneath the building, right? Like right there, we have an entrance.
Right, and they're blocking access for others. I don't want to take from your time, but that was the gist of the comment. We want to encourage the ride sharing. However, there's no place, there's not enough space for if you go on a Friday night or Saturday night.
I'm there every
Right,
Friday and
me
Saturday
too.
night.
So it's all backed up with the pickups and drop-offs. So if you're trying to
Okay,
cross
and
to go to the Grace Martin Hopper Park, it's very difficult to navigate those cars.
Well, Teresa, thank you.
Yeah, I know, but she was also talking about
Yeah,
it.
so,
Okay, my other concern is what's happening with Grace Hopper Park? I know it's going to be consolidated, but, and there's a big art sculpture in front of it. What are we doing with that? That's a question for later, but anyway, thank you.
Next person.
Matthew? Oh, boy. How's it going? I'm just here as a concerned citizen. Apologies, this is my first public comment as a citizen of Arlington. But yay! And I had a whole stump speech written about how, more development is important, but to stick more to the transportation issues, I want to foot stomp the talk about improving access to the metro station, because that's kind of important, especially when, by a conservative estimate, if every unit is filled, there'll be 1,500 to 2,000 more people living there. So the strange oddity of walking through the mall at night when it's like where it's open, sometimes they shut the door, otherwise you have to walk around the mall. That's certainly something to pay attention to, and maybe, I know that that was described as a several property owner discussion to have, but I would double emphasize that, and also where to park during construction. That was already brought up. I have a car. Unfortunately, I may be more of a YIMBY type, but I do have a car. So finding a place to put that during the construction would be awesome. And otherwise, I want to say, good job, more density.
Thank you very much. And we have one more online.
Yeah, Cameron M.
Okay, is Cameron M there?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Perfect. Hi. I'm also a resident of RiverHouse. Been here 5 years as well. I would also like to hit on the affordability question as well. I know, again, it's not necessarily focused on what the subject is tonight, but I've also seen my rent go up astronomically, just like in the last year, tried to go 20%, which to me is not affordable. Also doesn't really feel like it's a vision for looking forward, especially for catering for young people, for single families. I want to know what JBG Smith thinks about, for current residents at RiverHouse, opening up a town hall so that we feel like the process that's happening within our community feels a little bit more democratized. Right now, it feels like we're just sort of sent alerts after the fact. Like this long-term planning meeting was sent maybe in September. We didn't receive anything for tonight's meeting specifically. So it would be really great for the residents here to actually receive correspondence and feel like we're part of the discussion versus sort of being talked at. So if there's a way to sort of arrange a town hall within RiverHouse with the current residents, I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that concludes the public commenter portion of this. And remind everybody, November 16th is our final LRPC meeting for this, and then we'll move on to SBRCs. Commissioner Weir will be chairing those over there. Thank you all for coming out this evening. I think this has been a useful meeting. And I thank the staff and the applicant for their presentations. I think that helped direct the conversation well. So anyway, with that.
So at our next meeting, are we going to be able to go back to issues from the first meeting?
Yes, that's exactly what we want to do in our next meeting. We want to remind everybody what has changed from the first meeting and from this one, and then have the discussion on that. So that will be what the agenda will be for our next meeting. So anyway, thank you all, and we're done.
Thank you.
Since you stint on the
Yes, with the double record. There are forward shares.
But not this way. That's for everybody.
Pretty soon we're gonna have to start talking about air taxes. Your company said it's gonna go. Passive. No parking required.
I didn't get Yeah, thank you.
Trade an email. I'm glad we